Now that we talked about shot compositions, we're going to talk a little bit more about what goes into that shot and when you go out and shoot things. So, one of the first things to think about when you are out as a photographer or an ENG is shooting footage. And one of the things that we really want you to do is shoot something 3 times. I'm going to disappear so I can see a label real quick. So, you want to shoot just from where you're standing. Shoot a wide shot, zoom in and get a medium shot, and then zoom in, get a tight shot. There's never a penalty for having too much footage, and I've seen problems where people have come back and they didn't have enough. So just from where you are, shoot it wide for about 10 seconds, shoot medium about 10 seconds, shoot tight for about 10 seconds. That's a 30-second shot, or that's 30 seconds of video. And then you can pick up your camera and go off to another location and get different angles. But it's always good to have a plethora of shots and to have more that you need than to not have enough. And to shoot 3 angles from one position is very easy to do. And speaking of 3, one of the things that makes for a good shot composition is called the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is basically where we take a screen and we divide it into 3 sections. So it can be 3 columns, it can be 3 rows, a grid of 9. But using the rule of thirds lets you gives you good symmetry and balance for your shots. So a couple examples is here's a shot of Paris where a lot of people would think, let me put the Eiffel Tower in the middle of the screen, but in this case the artist moved it off to the right to kind of show you the skyline. Same thing happened with this couple is while they are the primary focus of the shot, he also kind of added the beach in to balance them out. So he had plenty of room going on. Could have even been like a sunset going on. So with the puppy, you've got the puppy kind of in the back. He's got a little room behind him, a lot of room in front. And this is kind of balancing the rule of thirds out. Likewise with this other picture of the 2 kids having some paint fun. And I'm going to hide out for a second for there is you do have the rule of thirds going in as well. You have one on the left side, one on the right side, and sort of the chaos in the middle. So even though they probably didn't realize they were doing this, the parent or whoever took this picture was actually following the rule of thirds. And we apply that to all the images that we shoot in our studio. So for a center shot, she's in that center column. She's got space on the right, she's got space on the left. I think I did that backwards, space on the left, space on the right. But she's following that middle third. If we're doing it over the shoulder balance, this one's kind of taking up that first third. The anchor's taking up the other 2 thirds. If you're doing a toss shot, it so happened in this first toss one, everyone got their own column. And nowadays we kind of have the 2 news anchors taking up the left 2, the sports anchor taking up the other 1/3. So when you're using the rule of thirds, you also have to remember some things that are kind of happening around. So one of the things I talked about is when you balance the shot out is you want to have room above their heads. So like in this example, I have about an inch or so above my head going into the camera. So you want to make sure that you're not cutting off the top of your person's interview. You also want to make sure that you're not cutting off like the bottom or you're not giving them too much headroom. So you want to have just kind of a nice good balance of a room above their head. In this case, it's not a good shot because we wind up cutting off the top of their head. And you can kind of see, so on the left side, we've cut off his head, we've cut off the top of his head. Even though they thought they were in the safety zone, they were on the edge of the screen. Now, when we wind up interviewing these 2 students, they have plenty of room above their heads, so they've got good headroom to kind of help create a very pleasing, eye-catching shot. The next type of things to think about is what's called the nose room. And this is the room in front of the interview subject's nose. And you'll see this a lot when we're getting interview shots. So with the nose room, there's a little bit behind them and a little bit in front. So in this case, let me kind of move over. I've got a lot of room leading out. So likewise, if it was something like this kind of looks like a weird shot because I've got all this room behind me, but my face is just sort of right up against the edge of the screen. So when you're thinking about nose room, you always want to have their back near the edge of the camera or the edge of the screen to give you a better looking image. So here's a couple examples of nose room in that we have a student who was interviewed, and again, plenty of room in front of their nose, little room behind. With this picture, we had a person who gave us bad nose room. So she's kind of following in the center of the rule of thirds, but I'm also getting a lot of just the side of her head as opposed to more of her face. So with this, You want to make sure that they're kind of turned and looking at you and not just always looking off to the side. Now, in this case, we have what I think might be way too much nose room, in that we have a background that has really nothing going on behind it. And so I think they could have tightened that shot up because this is just kind of distracting because there's nothing in it. Now, on the flip side of looking at that, I can see he has a mask. So this story might have been how the coronavirus or COVID is affecting business. So the videographer may have been showing a dead business or a closed business behind him as a part of the storytelling process. That's kind of one thing to consider. But when I first saw this, I thought maybe they just had bad nose room. And even with when you're shooting an interview shot, you can use the background and the area in front of the newsroom to help add to your story as well. So again, in this case, they may have been talking about you can use what's kind of going on behind them in the newsroom as part of your storytelling. And this was pretty decent. She has some headroom. She has some good newsroom. My only complaint about this is that she's looking straight at the camera. And so we apply the rule of thirds into almost everything that we wind up using. So this is an ideally composed shot. He's got plenty of headroom. He's got some back room. He's got good nose room, and you can see he's off looking at the talent. And this is kind of following the rule of thirds, in that he's kind of taking up the right 2/3 and leaving that left third for the reporter to kind of stand in and talk to. My only one complaint about this shot is that they shot in front of a window. So in order to be able to make him brighter, the camera had to iris up to let in more light. And in doing so, you can't tell what's in the window behind him. I just happen to know from where it was shot that there should be a football field back there with players playing behind him. But because they shot it in front of the window and the iris couldn't compensate, it wound up overexposing the background. And even when you use extreme close-ups, you still have the ability to use the rule of thirds to set up your shot and to kind of help draw focus. So that's a little bit of shot composition and how you can set up different types of shots if it's interviewed centered over the shoulder. And by using the rule of thirds, you can keep a very good symmetry in your shot that looks well on television.